Today we face the threat of our lifetime. The CCP is indeed that. And this is where we were in 1999. As you can see, we were in pretty good shape in relation to the area of influence of the Chinese Communist Party and their military assets. Let's fast forward to today. We see modernized PLA forces, we see the area of influence. Significant,
the Chinese army showed this short video of simulated attacks on Taiwan
by the Chinese.
with missiles fired
Incredible.
from land,
It's
sea, and
hard to
air
believe that this
on the
is what
island's
they've done through
territory.
those years to not only catch up but to surpass us. Folks, the next chart is what keeps me up at night. This is where the CCP will be in 2025.
This is Representative Rob Whitman addressing Armed Services Committee regarding China's threat. China had been rising superpower since late 1990s, up to the point where even the United States had to go in overdrive to defend their allies near China. Obvious proof is this document from 2022. This is official document from the United States military, where it outlines that China is a threat for them and that they have to arm most of their allies and their small islands near. China has been getting lots of media coverage for a while now. On one side, we have this huge industrial powerhouse that's aiming to overtake United States global dominance and annex Taiwan.
A massive show of military might off the coast of Taiwan. China deploying fighter jets and warships Saturday, sending 71 planes into Taiwan's airspace, and at least 9 Chinese warships now surrounding the self-governed island of Taiwan, simulating a naval blockade.
You write in your book that China may eventually usurp America as the world's leading superpower. Can you touch on a few indicators that that prediction is based upon?
It is likely that it will pass the United States.
However, on the other hand, we also have a country with lots of economic problems that makes it look like falling off a bunch of dominoes.
Now, one of China's largest real estate developers has been ordered to liquidate by a court in Hong Kong. Evergrande is the world's most indebted developer with more than 270 billion euros worth of liabilities.
So which is it? Is China really collapsing, or will it take over the United States in terms of economy and global dominance? Before delving into those issues, let's explore a few chapters about it. How did China's economy reach this point? Why is China's economy currently in trouble? And will economic troubles continue to haunt China and stop it from overtaking the United States? Whenever we think of China, we usually think of a country with lots of factories and huge population that supplies our world with their industrial output. However, that wasn't always the case. You see, before the China's economy miracle, China was a very impoverished and secluded country. China mainly used similar economic models that Soviet Union used. In this case, communism. They would often ask for Soviet Union's help on planning their economy. The economy was mainly planned in terms of 5 years, that were also known as 5-year plans, and just like the Soviet Union, China heavily emphasized on heavy industries. Nationalization of resources and getting rid of private businesses quickly showed a limited success to China's economy. However, it wouldn't really be enough to lift the nation from poverty. The governmental mistakes would often lead to terrible consequences. For example, Great Chinese Famine, a man-made famine which had caused the starvation of tens of millions of people. Even after such incident, China's production could not keep up with their population growth. While many people usually attribute China's success to its huge population and cheap labor, attributing China's success to such issues is big oversimplification, considering that there was a key component that played a major role for China's enormous success. So what really made China so attractive for investors? As we have mentioned earlier, China was mostly closed-off country to foreign investors. Think of it as modern North Korea, as in a country that had barely any trading going on to outside world. However, that would all change in late 1970s. China was falling in stagnation, political turmoil was sweeping over the country. However, Chinese Communist Party leaders had one trump card up their sleeves, which would be later on used in 1978. At the time, China's population was growing by more than 10 million people each year, and the country did not really have enough resources to satisfy the demands for their booming population, thus something needed to be done quickly. China soon realized that their domestic resources will not be enough to keep up the pace with population growth and modernize their production lines, thus they had to quickly look for outside help. Leaders of Communist China got together in 1978 and created a overly ambitious 10-year plan. However, there was something different this time. China finally wanted to join trade with the outside world. They quickly established full diplomatic relations with the US and created special economic zones in several cities. The first such cities was Shenzhen, a small fishing city that had around 50,000 people in 1978. However, that would all change since the reform. Besides being the first city with market economy, Shenzhen had lots of perks that made investors so attracted to it. Cheap labor aside, Shenzhen was located close to Hong Kong. At the time, Hong Kong was much more richer and densely populated. Therefore, the need for a manufacturing base close to them was entrepreneurs' dream come true. Cheap labor, geographical closeness, and promising governmental perks were among top reasons that made Shenzhen so attractive for investors. In just first 5 years, the GDP had grown 14 times. Seeing the success of such economic zones, Chinese government decided to open more and more cities to global economy. This would create an emerging middle class all around the country, which is where the second chapter comes in. You will see, with the emerging middle class, the demand of middle class housing was rising quickly, so companies quickly rushed in and started making lots and lots of apartment buildings. Most of the workers' wealth eventually ended up tied up in real estate. This would create one of the most overpriced housing markets in the world in terms of unaffordability. The property industry was moving fast. They all started new projects by using money from unfinished projects. This later created this big sort of an economic bubble that was ticking time bomb for China's economy. Thus, they decided to introduce new regulations that would tighten such fast borrowing pace of real estate companies and essentially introduce new borrowing regulations with the quote of houses are for living, not for speculation. Unfortunately for China, the time bomb had just recently gone off during the pandemic. A larger percentage of GDP was tied up in China's real estate market, thus the crisis only made situations worse. Evergrande, China's second biggest real estate company and often deemed as too big to fail, couldn't keep up with such regulations and they had to liquidate in 2024. Evergrande is one of among more than 200 home developers that filed for bankruptcy in China in 2023 alone. It got bad to the point where hundreds of buildings had to be demolished, with plans to demolish more buildings that would potentially house 75 million people, or around a quarter of the United States population. Real estate aside, there is also a huge problem that will haunt China in the next few decades. This aspect made China into a great superpower. However, China's biggest strength is soon turning into its greatest weakness. Such weakness is its demography. It's getting worse and worse. Well, one might ask, but why do you think so? After all, they have more than 1 billion people. To put it simply, replacement fertile rate per woman is 2.1. This means that on average, each woman should have around 2.1 kids just for population replacement. This number doesn't take migration and immigration in account. While it can be true that every developed nation suffers from below replacement fertility level, they were usually in much higher economical place compared to China. China's one-child policy, a policy that allowed families to only have one child, turned out to be self-harming for the country's long-term population goals. Not only did it greatly reduce the number of potential kids that could have been born, but it also created gender disbalance, meaning that there were far more boys that didn't get aborted compared to girls. It also doesn't help a lot that China suffers from huge negative net immigration, meaning that way more people leave the country than enter it. This could be explained by huge brain drain. Despite its high development, a person in the United States can receive higher salary compared to China. The overall picture isn't looking great. Not only are China's average demographic age rising, but the population is slowly declining. United Nations forecasts that China's population will shrink by 109 million by 2050. Not only that, but the situation is getting worse to the point where young people are no longer willing to put up with strict working hours and strict working conditions. Thus they even created a slang for it, called tang ping, meaning lying flat. What adds more pressure was damage caused by COVID-19. China had to choose between two extremely hard choices. Either put emergency brakes on the economy in the efforts to continue lockdown, thus saving more people, or let factories and other industrial elements continue operating at the risk of COVID virus spreading further. China chose the first option, and that made companies realize that they could no longer rely on a single country. They had to deal with lots of issues with supply chain and other instruments that were caused by China's strict lockdowns. Unfortunately for China, US had recently started reinvesting and enacting more economical policies that would make it more attractive for domestic businesses to produce goods on homeland, as in favoring China. One of such policies were Inflation Reduction Act that was passed by President Biden that introduced more incentives for domestic production. Before that, China was already reporting reduced foreign direct investments, but in 2023 they have showed the lowest ever direct foreign investment numbers since 1993. Overall picture is not great, but China still has a chance to overtake the United States if they manage to pull through one of the great filters in economic theory. So what is that filter, you might ask? Well, China is currently in a tough spot. On the first hand, we have companies that are constantly pulling out of China and finding other markets for cheap labor. This is also known as middle income trap. It's an economic phenomenon where a middle income country can no longer compete in terms of domestic production due to rising labor price, so they can either innovate or have stagnant economy. Nowadays, it is much cheaper to hire someone in India compared to hiring someone from China. But at the same time, China has enormous amounts of resources, 1.4 billion population and huge experience in few fields, including real estate, building and logistics. And all of this could be game changer for country's economy. If China somehow manages to pull through the trap, be that by making more innovative products for the market or changing their angle of approach towards other aspects, they could potentially reignite their economic engine. The time of China being the world's giant factory is going away. However, there is a rising need for China to become an innovative powerhouse. Sadly, I don't necessarily think that China could fully transform itself into such an innovative powerhouse. For one, the rising tensions over Taiwan makes it harder for Western-aligned countries to accept China's application and digital products. TikTok is a great example of this. However, there is a whole other world besides Western nations and their aligned countries. For example, China has a great chance at competing worldwide in their logistics, engineering and electric car sector. This is already happening in dozens of countries, where Chinese car makers are actively overtaking Western-aligned automakers. However, unfortunately for China, time is ticking. India is becoming a new China, and the US is not happy about exporting jobs as they were once in 1980s.
Nancy, tell us about the White House's upcoming Investing in America tour, as it's called. What is the thinking behind such a major push for more U.S. manufacturing?
Well, the White House knows it has some work to do when it comes to touting the president's economic achievements. Those are the main achievements he's likely to be able to tout on the campaign trail because they took place before Republicans took over the House. And so, you could put a lot of his big signature pieces of legislation into that manufacturing bucket, whether it is the infrastructure law, $1.2 trillion worth of spending on infrastructure, or the CHIPS and Science Act to build more computer chips here in America, or the Inflation Reduction Act. All of those major pieces of legislation were aimed at creating more jobs, bringing the supply chain back here to the U.S., particularly when it comes to advanced manufacturing.
Such example would be huge subsidies from US government when it comes to chip production and other sectors. The economic clock is not exactly kind in China's case. If anything, they have a very short window of time to quickly rise and beat the United States, otherwise they might drift off towards remaining the second biggest economy in the world. Thank you for watching the video. If you have enjoyed it, please consider subscribing so you will not miss out our future uploads.